Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the 8bitdo Ultimate Wired Controller for Xbox. This is not a retro-inspired controller like most of the controllers that they make. This one is actually more of a modern design, and it'll work with the Xbox along with a few other devices, which we'll talk about in just a second. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this controller is all about. Now, the price point on this controller is $45 or thereabouts. It's available in 3 colors. This is the black one, obviously, but there is a white one and a pink one available. It feels very nice in the hand. One of the things that 8bitdo is quite good at is industrial design, and it's very comfortable to hold. It is a little smaller, though, than your standard Xbox One controller, as you can see here. So if you have larger hands, you might prefer the Microsoft controller, but for hands about my size here, medium-sized hands, I found it to be very comfortable and lightweight. Now, this is a wired controller. It does not work over Bluetooth, so it has to be plugged in to work. The cable length on this is 3 meters or 9.84 feet. That is not enough for my living room, so my Xbox Series X is across the room, and I was only getting about 3/4 of the way to my couch with the cable here. So you might need to get a USB extension cable perhaps to get it fully out to your couch if it is far away from your big screen TV. It does have a breakaway here, similar to what we've seen on some of the other Microsoft wired controllers. The good news is that the latency on this is super low. I do a little test shooting a screen at 240 frames per second, and it was just as quick, if not a little bit quicker, than the wired Xbox controller that is often the best testing device that I use here on the channel. So I think from a latency perspective, wiring directly into the console is going to give you the lowest possible latency. And again, the only way you can use this is to wire it in. Now, as far as compatibility is concerned, it works with the Xbox One consoles along with the new Series consoles. It works with Windows 10 PCs. It does not work, however, with phones or tablets. That includes iPhones and iPads along with Android phones and tablets. I tried plugging it into a bunch of different devices. I even plugged it into my NVIDIA Shield, which does work with Xbox controllers. This controller did not work, so it is going to be fairly limited. I did test it also with RetroPie. It worked fine on the Raspberry Pi with that particular distribution of its operating system. It also worked with the MiSTer project, and I'll show you some examples of the D-pad running on MiSTer in a little bit. Now, it is made out of plastic, but it feels like a nice high-quality plastic, very similar to some of the other 8bitdo controllers we have looked at. The back of it does have a nice rough texture to it, so you'll get a good grip on it. Now, this controller does have 2 buttons here on the bottom, which are configurable, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You've got some really nice analog triggers here that have vibration motors on them, along with your 2 triggers up top here, or shoulder buttons. You have some really nice analog sticks, and we'll explore some of the analog stick configuration you can do with this in a little bit. And then you've got your D-pad here. Now, what's interesting about the D-pad is that this looks a lot like the D-pad we see on some of their retro controllers. I found it worked okay, but not as well as it does on some of the other 8bitdo controllers that I've reviewed in the past. So we loaded up my MiSTer with The Legend of Zelda here, and as you can see, it sometimes gets a few errant diagonals in there when you go back and forth on the D-pad. We also loaded up Contra, and I was able to very successfully point my gun in diagonals without any issues there. So Contra did a little better than Zelda did, but I think if you are looking to do some retro gaming, some of the other 8bitdo controllers are going to work better for that. The D-pad is a little better, I think, than the Microsoft D-pad, but it's not as good as I've seen 8bitdo do on some of their other controllers. And one other gotcha on this one is that the rumble motors don't feel as strong as they do on the Xbox controller, and they are a little noisy. Things tend to rattle around a little bit on the controller when those rumble motors are going off. Now, there's a few more buttons on here. Specifically, there is a button for selecting different profiles, because you can load in 3 different configuration options for the controller for different games, and those configurations can be stored on the controller so you can take it with you to different devices and have that configuration follow. Now, right in the middle here, there is a capture button. So when you push that, your Xbox will share a screenshot or capture. So that's a quick shortcut button there. There's a star button up here, and this button is used for swapping the location of buttons on the fly without having to use the configuration software. I probably wouldn't do that myself, given how easy it is to configure the controller with the software, but if you needed to do something quickly on the fly, you can do that with the star button. On the bottom here, there is a headphone microphone jack, of course, for your headset. You've got a mute switch here, and then you can adjust the volume of that headphone jack by holding down this button here and pushing up and down for the game volume, and then left and right for the chat volume. Now, the configuration software runs on the Xbox along with Windows, and there's a version that runs on iOS and Android. So even though the controller doesn't work as a game controller on mobile phone platforms, the phones can configure the controller, and I'll show you a really cool use case for that in a second. Now, when you pop into the software, regardless of platform, you select which profile you want to apply the settings to. So right now we're on profile number 1, and then we'll hit our shoulder buttons here to go between the different configuration options. The first one here is the button mapping, and so what you can do is remap any of these buttons to something else. So for example, I could have my LT button here become a different button. I can basically map something else to LT if I wanted to. I can also configure those two buttons on the bottom of the controller to map to any of the others. There does not appear to be a macro function at the moment, so all this really lets you do is just remap the button layout, but I can see some instances where this might be very useful, especially if you are playing some retro game or something that may not be that flexible in control mapping. This is going to interest a lot of folks, which is the stick configuration. And what you can do here is set the sensitivity and dead zones of each of the sticks along with inverting them if you would like to do that. And so for example, right now we've got the left stick here, and I'm going to create a larger dead zone for it. And what will happen here is in a game, it won't start registering the movement of the stick until I get outside of that dead zone that I just established. And you can work this in two different directions here, so I can also tighten up the sensitivity here a bit as well. So that's pretty useful. You can do the same on the right stick. And then you've got your inversion here. You also can disable the dead zone completely, although they will pop up a warning here saying that this might cause some controller drift. But if you did want to disable its built-in dead zone completely, you have the option to do that. Now, one thing you do need to do when you change something is you need to sync the changes to the controller, and you'll see that option here at the bottom. So when you do that, it will update the controller, and now profile 1 will have that setting change that I just made. Let me just put it back here, and we'll continue onward, and we'll resync that. A couple other settings here are the triggers, so I can also adjust the sensitivity of these triggers and their dead zones, and we can do this on some of the other 8bitdo controllers too. And if I go over to the vibration setting here, you can set the strength of the vibration motors for each of the locations where those motors are located. Now, as I mentioned, you can also run this software on a smartphone, and it works over Bluetooth. So let's load up the software here on my Android phone, and I'm just going to tap on the screen here, and now we're all linked up. And if I go over to the more settings here and look at the sticks, you can see that I'm able to do a lot of what we just did on the Xbox, and of course we would be doing the same on Windows. But where this gets interesting on the mobile side is that I'm able to play my game while I look at the impact of the changes that I make. So for example, right now we're just kind of doing a little twirl of the camera here, and I can see on the phone what movement kind of translates into what number, and I can then dial in a dead zone that might work better. So for example, if I'm moving the controller here, I might want to, I don't know, maybe make the dead zone like right to here. And so in a minute, that will not move the camera at all. And what I have to do here is sync it up. And then after I do that, and I select my first profile on the controller. Now when I move the controller here, nothing happens until I get outside of that dead zone that I just established. And I really like this ability to see the impact of a change in the middle of the game. And that to me is kind of the differentiator here, because I was looking at this thinking, well, okay, it's kind of weird that it's got Bluetooth on board and it doesn't actually work with the phone for a gameplay kind of thing. But it is, I think, very useful to be able to watch what you're doing and then make your settings adjustments in the game without having to log out, log back in, and troubleshoot. So this is a much faster way to get the controller configured exactly the way you want it to work. Now, as far as general gameplay is concerned, I did find that there is more travel to these sticks versus a regular Xbox controller. So that might be something that'll take some getting used to. And I'm also finding that depending on the game, you might have a bit more of a dead zone as a result. So for example, I am currently moving the right stick to about 20% of its full range of movement, and I'm not getting any camera movement until I go beyond that 20% mark. And I found some games have a little bit more dead zone and others have a little less, but typically you've got to get about 15% of the controller stick movement before something happens. And I think this is kind of exacerbated by the fact that I've got this meter running on the phone simultaneously to give me an idea as to how much stick movement I've got. There doesn't seem, though, to be much of a dead zone insofar as what is detectable. So I'm guessing that this might be more of an in-game thing than an actual dead zone on the controller itself. But nonetheless, if these games are designed for control sticks that have a little less travel, you will see more of a dead zone, and that might be hard to configure your way out of because you can only make the dead zone bigger on this controller, not smaller. I did try to turn off that dead zone setting, and that didn't make any difference here either. But beyond that, it felt like the control sticks are very solid and accurate, very sensitive, as you can see, and the buttons and everything else just feel pretty nice and high quality. Probably not quite as good as a first-party Xbox controller, but pretty close to it. And I think the real value proposition of this controller is the fact that it is so configurable, especially with this cool wireless mobile app that we've been playing around with. So I think that might appeal to some folks, especially for casual gamers that do want some customization but don't want to spend a fortune on a game controller. I think this one will give you a lot of flexibility. I do wish the cable was a little bit longer. I do wish the D-pad was just slightly better and maybe more in line with some of their other retro controllers. But beyond that, I found this to be a decent controller for its price point with plenty of features, including that cool wireless configuration one that we've been playing with throughout the review here. That is going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Jim Tanis and Tom Albrecht, Hot Sauce and Video Games and Eric's Variety Channel, Brian Parker and Frank Goldman, Amda Brown and Matt Zagaya, and Chris Allegretta. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.